I don't know about you, but I make the same types of cards over and over again. Birthday, thank you, Christmas, and thinking of you. And within those categories, I have some favorite stamps and dies that I reach for over and over. As a first step to being more efficient, a few months ago, I actually moved all my sentiment stamps and dies into their own drawer so that they're all together and they're easier to grab. But it still takes time. After watching Laurel and her magic mug, and Amy and her sentiment binder, I've started thinking that it would be helpful to have die-cut words or stamp sentiments on hand, ready to go. One of the nice things about storing your stamps and dies in pockets is you can store any extras in there, whether it's a die that cuts 5 flowers at a time when you only need one, or you didn't know exactly how much you needed when you were creating your card, or you were just playing around, trying out color combinations, or a cover plate where you can keep the extra full background, or little scraps like this. I've already been doing this with my leftovers, and I love that feeling when I grab a particular stamp or die and there's already one there that I can use on my card. So I thought, why not be more intentional about it and create sentiments to keep for future use? Let's start with stamps and dies created specifically for this purpose. I think Tailored Expressions was one of the first to create this ingenious way of stamping multiple sentiments, then die cutting them all at once. I didn't hop on board until I found this stamp that has my go-to sentiments on it. You simply ink up the stamp with whatever ink you want. I'm using clear embossing ink here and black cardstock. But make sure to ink up those solid squares, they're important. Then I pour white embossing powder over top and I heat it until it's all melted and smooth. I use my foil-lined shoebox lid to hold the panel, and this keeps my fingers away from the heat, and it also reduces warping because the foil reflects the heat back. And while the stamp is in the MISTI, I did a couple more. I did white embossing on white cardstock in the same way, and also some black stamping on white cardstock, and then embossed with clear powder so that the words have some shine. You can store the panels just like this in your pocket and die cut later if you want, but I'm going to die cut now. It's so simple to line up the matching die by just lining up those 4 solid squares. This will give perfect placement and spacing to the sentiments when you die cut them. And this shape is nice. It has kind of cut off corners, but there's enough room that you can customize it so that they're straight on both ends, slanted, or even cut them with banner ends. The white on white is great because I can use my ink pads to color the white cardstock any color I want, but right now they're kind of hard to read. I quickly flipped them over and I wrote TY for thank you, TH for thinking of you, and HB for birthday on the back. And now to store them in my pockets, I've come up with the idea of using little Ziploc bags. I've collected so many of them over the years when I buy ink refills or things like that, and they're nice because they're clear. But you could use paper envelopes too. I separated these ones out by sentiment and I put 3 little bags in the back of my pocket. I made a card with 3 thank you sentiments that I had blended ink onto, along with the City Light stencil that I had turned 3 times to get this layered, almost kind of plaid look. I created a negative frame with an Essential Circles die, and that helps draw your eye to the center. And those little silver dot embellishments? I'll come back to those in a minute. Now let's talk about sentiment stamps that have coordinating dies. I'm seeing more and more of this type of set recently, and it's the perfect way to work ahead. This set has more sentiments than will fit onto one panel, so I'm choosing my favorites and putting the dies on. I got all my favorites on there, and there was still some space, so I added a couple of extras at the bottom. Then I used pieces of yellow tape to hold the dies in place, but also to tape them to each other. This will allow me to easily use this configuration more than once, like this. So now I've got all the die cuts in black and white, and I've also got a template that I can keep in the pocket for future use. Right now, since I have all the die cuts, I'm going to stamp on all of them for future projects. I suggest putting a contrasting piece of cardstock underneath the template so you can more easily see where you're lining up the stamps so they're centered properly. I did a test with a scrap piece of paper and made some adjustments where I needed them. And if you want to heat emboss these, you can put a piece of post-it tape behind the template. This will hold the die cuts in place while you stamp, pour the powder over, and then heat them up. Here are some leftovers I already had in my pocket for this set. I can't remember why I had these, but they're great to have on hand if I want to die cut them with the matching die, or maybe a circle or rectangle. This will give me options. Now let's take a second to talk about my little silver dots. I have this polka dot cover plate that creates a great background, but I've also been using it with small scraps of cardstock so that I've got extra little dots that I can use almost like little sequins. This is a great way to use up scraps of specialty cardstock and also a great way to work ahead with other crafty tools. I created a Christmas card with one of the die cut sentiments along with this square doily stencil and some more of those silver embellishments. Okay, so now what about a sentiment set that doesn't have coordinating dies? I have a couple of ideas for that. Take a look at these little sentiments from Mama Elephant. Now take a look at this round the block mini slim die from Crafty Meraki. Those circles look like a perfect fit for many of those sentiments. Again, I picked my favorites, the birthdays, the thank yous, the thinking of yous, and then I added a couple of more. Then I stamped more of just my 3 favorites. I know these are the ones that I'll go through fastest, so it's great to have even more of them on hand. I made a card with one of these where I blended yellow ink around the edges. This leaves the black stamping visible and also gives a look of some dimension. I popped it up in the center of one of these circles created with the round Fragments stencil. And yes, those silver dots again. The other thing you can do with sentiments without dies is strips. Now these sets from Pretty Pink Posh and Lawn Fawn are great candidates for different size strips. And if you don't want to go as far as stamping everything and keeping it all in the back of the pocket, what about this idea? Cut some strips, whether they're with a set like this Color Me strip set from Ellen Hudson or just with your trimmer, and keep them in the back of the stamp pocket. When you want to use these sets as sentiments, you won't have to go and find the dies and cut the strips, and that'll save you some time. This is a great crafty activity for days that you're not feeling particularly creative, but it could feel like an overwhelming job if you're trying to build up an inventory of leftovers with purpose. So the key is to be efficient. If you're using a template like I did in the previous cards because you need one sentiment, make a few of the others that you don't need that day and put them away for future use. This also works with die cut words. Let me show you. These are my 2 current favorite dies for happy birthday and thank you. And not only do I love to use them on cards, I love to stack them up. So that means I need a few of them each time I make a card. Since I only have one of each die, I can't cut more than one of them at a time, but I can cut both of them at the same time, even if I'm not making both cards that day. It's a different mindset, but if you cut more than you need each time you cut, you'll be building up an inventory and saving time in the future. I tend to cut these in white. That's usually what I would use for stacking up a sentiment die cut. And if I want a different color, I can blend ink onto one of them. This one's a little fiddly, so I used some temporary adhesive to stick it down to my water media mat, and then I gently blended ink on top, building up the layers to get the deeper colors. I put this sentiment onto a card blended with the birthday cake stencil. For another option, I can cut specialty cardstock like this honey satin on the day I'm actually making the card. When I'm stacking up the sentiment, having to cut just one on the day I'm making the card is still much better than having to cut 3 or 4 more. I put this die cut onto a panel with the boho medallion stencil, and I liked it so much that I went back, cut the happy birthday again from that same honey cardstock, and at the same time used a scrap to create some dots for future projects. Now here's one quick little bonus idea. I've got these little Ellen Hudson block word dies that cut individual letters. So let's say I need happy. I cut it from a scrap, and yep, I can use those 5 letters on a card. But I can also use a rectangle die and cut around the negative portion of the word. I can keep it to use as a template for letter placement on future cards, or I can use it on a card as part of a sentiment. This will work better for some words than others, depending on the shapes of the letters, but this one definitely looks like happy. I created some dark blue cardstock with my ink pad, and I cut a smaller rectangle from it and glued it behind for higher contrast. Then I grabbed one of those little circle happy birthdays I had stamped earlier, and I attached it under the bottom right edge so that only the birthday portion was showing. You could definitely set aside some time to work specifically on sentiments any day you're not feeling creative. Or you can be smart and get into the habit of creating for the future even while you're creating for your current projects. Or you can do both. You can also work ahead with stamped images or other die cut shapes. If you're looking for more strategies for quick card making, click this link right here. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.